Well, we're in lesson 9 in our studies in the book of Job, and we come to chapters 38 and 39 and into the first part of chapter 40. Then the Lord, chapter 38, verse 1, then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" Well, of course, this is the first time that God has spoken. He has spoken in the prologue to you and me, but this is the first time that God has actually spoken to Job himself. You know, in our last lesson, we were looking at Elihu, and one of the reasons why Elihu is sometimes, by some commentators, regarded negatively is that there is no approval on God's part of Elihu's contribution. There is a judgment by God on the three friends, but there is silence as far as Elihu is concerned. Some have turned that silence into an approval, and some have turned that silence into a condemnation along with the three friends. The argument from silence can often go in both directions. Elihu's contribution had been to raise the level of awareness on Job's part of his sovereignty and particularly his majesty. If you have an ESV translation, for example, the heading that's provided for chapter 37 is Elihu proclaims God's majesty. And that's certainly where chapter 38 comes in. The majesty, the sovereignty of God. And he speaks. He is altogether above and beyond us. I remember back in the mid-1970s, I was a seminary student, and one of the books assigned to me to read was Herman Bavinck's book on the doctrine of God. I remember the opening sentence of the book. Mystery is the vital element of dogmatics. I can't tell you how disappointed I was. I thought this book was going to tell me all I needed to know about the doctrine of God, and the opening statement was about mystery. That there were things about God that I couldn't possibly know or possibly understand. I thought I had been cheated, to be honest. And I've since, of course, seen the profundity of the comment. Mystery is the vital element in dogmatics. And the mystery of God, not mystery in the sense of a mystery novel, but mystery in the sense of the awesomeness of God, the majesty of God, is a vital part of what trials and suffering actually teach us. God speaks, and his immediate point of entry reminds us that this has been a contest on Job's part about words, about understanding. It's an epistemological battle. And Job has been speaking words, lots of words, but they are words without knowledge. They are words without understanding. And so in verse 3, God issues a challenge. He'll do this again later. Dress for action like a man. The verb in the Hebrew, dress for action, is a verb that is employed in the realm of wrestling. This is a wrestling match. It's not an arm wrestle, it's an epistemological wrestle. It's a wrestle about ideas. It's a wrestle about wisdom. It's a wrestle about understanding. And here are the rules for the game. I will question you, and you make it known to me. You immediately want to protest. Job is the one who's been asking questions. God is the one who's supposed to answer these questions. When he comes in and addresses Job, he reverses it, and he says, no, I'm the one who will ask the questions. You will be the one who will provide the answers. You get the sense already, don't you? That there is something about this contest that isn't a contest between equals. I remember watching that program, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It said everything that was wrong about our society. You know, you don't want to be a millionaire, not unless God gives you the gifts that you need in order to survive that experience, because it can ruin you, and it can ruin your marriage, and it can ruin your family. People are going to come out of the woodwork related to you that you didn't know about. And they're going to be on your doorstep. Life is going to be very difficult. I remember in the introduction to the game, there were some throwaway questions, simple questions. Questions for, $50, $100, even up to $1,000. Everybody walked away with $1,000. And there were 3 or 4 questions. And there was this lady, and my memory plays tricks with me these days, so my memory is, she worked in a post office somewhere in Iowa. And she's on this program. She is bouncy, excited, thrilled to be on this program. She couldn't answer any of the opening questions. She goes home with nothing. There were rules, and the compere of the program, was apologetic and so on, but she couldn't answer the simple questions. So she didn't make it to the actual game part. And I often wondered about her. You'd go in to buy some stamps, and there she is, and you'd say, oh yes, she's the one who couldn't answer the simple questions. Well, what is question number 1 to Job in verse 4? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Oh, you want to say, that's not fair. What kind of question is that? That's just not fair. Job is suffering. He wants an explanation of his trial. He wants an explanation of his predicament. And God is saying, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you have understanding. Job has been saying in the course of this book that he has the right to understand. He has the right to knowledge. Well, how much knowledge can Job have? Were you there when I created the earth? And the answer, of course, is no. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors? Now, question after question after question. There are 50, 60 plus questions that are asked here. Job can't answer any of them. Not a single one. What is that saying to us? That God is far greater than you can ever imagine him to be. There are 2 things going on here. One is, it's exalting the majesty of God, the greatness of God. Can you go back to the beginning of creation? Have you been in the depths of the earth? How far down into the core of the earth can you go? And even in 2016, man hasn't made it to the center of the earth. There are movies that say that man has done that and come out the other side. You realize that's fantasy. That hasn't happened. How far into space can man go? These are the sorts of questions that are being asked here. Well, I'm following the Mars project. I have an app on my phone. It's still sending out little pictures. That little robot thing on wheels. It's been traveling for the last couple of years now, I think. And every day there's a new picture. Well, I believe this. I don't think it's some guy in Houston who's just making up pictures and putting them there every day. Well, that may be possible. But I actually believe that there's this contraption on Mars. It's breathtaking. The pictures are breathtaking. Now, it's not Florida. It's more like Arizona. But these pictures tell us something of what no man, no human being had ever seen before. Did you watch the first picture? Did you stay up? What sort of people are you? This was groundbreaking in the history of humanity. We were the first generation of human beings ever to actually see the surface of Mars. It was a breathtaking moment when that picture came through, and it was so clear. It was just rocks, lots of rocks, as far as you could see rocks. There were no Martians, there was no grass, there wasn't a lake, there were no alligators, nothing, just rocks. But it was beautiful. It was extraordinarily beautiful. But that's just in our little planetary system. You've looked at the Hubble telescope pictures. And that time when the Hubble telescope looked at a point in space that seemed to have nothing in it. It was just darkness, just blackness. And it concentrated on that millions and millions of galaxies in that dark spot. That the world is far greater, the cosmos is far greater, far more complex than you could ever imagine it to be. And God made all this. He spoke and he brought it into being. Well, that's our philosophy, isn't it? That's our worldview. That's how we understand the origin of the universe. God made it. He spoke it into being. He caused it. Well, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Verse 22. Let's pick up some of the questions. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Or have you seen the storehouses of the hail? Now, you're going to have to use your imagination here in Florida. You know, snow, this white stuff. And those poor folk up in the north, having to shovel snow for months on end in the wintertime. And there's something extraordinarily beautiful about a snowflake. And no one snowflake is the same as another, so they say. And there's a storehouse. It's a metaphor. This isn't speaking scientifically. But where does all this snow come from? Do you know? How does it all work? And we can give some kind of explanation, and we get better and better at it, predicting the weather and so on. But who is in ultimate control? Verse 28 has the rain a father. Verse 31, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? And so on, the solar system, the stars, bear, and guide the bear with its children. Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on earth? And let's go down to chapter 39 and verse 1. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? I'm not, goats have become popular. Lots of my church members now have goats. There was a wonderful, amusing story in Columbia, South Carolina, just a few months ago. Students at the University of South Carolina, you can imagine, 4 students, college students, they're living in a house together. Instead of having to mow the yard, they thought they would just buy a goat. It would be so much easier, except this goat broke out within seconds. Tore down the fence, was careering down the road, and 4 students trying to catch it. And there was a person there with a camera and took pictures and so on, made the front page of the local paper. Not much happens in Columbia. And it was the story about the goat. It was a wonderful story. But these are goats that live high up in the mountains that you've never seen. And perhaps would rarely see even if you went looking for them. And they give birth. Who has let, verse 5 of chapter 39, who has let the wild donkey go free? Who has loosed the bonds of the swift donkey, to whom I have given the arid plain for his home and the salt land for his dwelling place? Go all the way down to the end of the chapter. There's just questions about birds in verse 13, the wings of the ostrich. In verse 19, about horses. In verse 26, is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? And so on. I'm always amazed by the migration patterns of birds. And geese, for example, I know they're noisy and they make a lot of mess. We won't go into that. But I live in a place and there's a little lake, and they're like homing pigeons. As soon as they see that lake, they come swooping down, and they make that distinctive noise of a goose. And my dog will start barking immediately when he hears it. And occasionally I've opened the front door and I'll say, "Go!" And he runs after them and shoos them away to somebody else's lake. Where have these geese come from? They come every year. And they'll be in Canada at one point, and then they'll be, well, I guess they go to Mexico, they go to South Florida, they go somewhere warm. And but they can find their way back. Salmon in the sea. Amazing. Some of you have taken a cruise to Alaska, and you've gone to where the salmon spawn. And they've been gone for a year, 2 years, is it 5 years? I remember somebody telling me 5 years, the lifespan of a salmon. But they come back to where they were born. How in the world do they find it? How do they know? What is it that drives them back to the very place in which they were born? All of these things, these questions. And we're searching these questions. We are meant to be searchers and explorers. God made us such. In Genesis chapter 1, the image of God we are made, and part of that image is to explore, to subdue the earth, to find out knowledge about what's in the earth, knowledge about animals and birds and creatures that we share this planet with, knowledge about the universe, knowledge about the star system, and so on. To go where no man has gone before. But there's so much that we don't know. There's so much that we don't understand. There's so much that we cannot fathom. Why is God asking these questions? He comes to Job in his suffering. He's lost his 10 children. He's lost his wealth. He's lost the respect of his wife. He's lost his health. He's dying. He's skin and bones. He's almost expired. And God puts to him 50, 60 plus questions. Look at verse 2 of chapter 40. Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. What's God saying to Job? Well, you're a fault finder. You've drawn the conclusion. You find yourself in trouble. You find yourself in trial, and you've blamed God. You've turned to God and you've said, this is your fault. Shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. God is great. God is big. God's knowledge, his understanding, his wisdom. How can you possibly understand it? How can you possibly fathom it? You want to know the secret of the universe. You want to know why it is that this particular event has happened to you. What do you need to know in order to answer that question? You need to know everything. This event is related to 1,000 other events. And those 1,000 events are related to a million more events. You can't possibly take it all in. God is ordering the universe. God is ordering the end from the beginning. You are not God. You know, that's probably the most important lesson that you can ever learn. There is only one God, and you are not that God. But that's our problem, isn't it? That we often fail to grasp that very lesson. We make ourselves to be God. We create idols. And often that idol is me, self. I demand of God. I know better than God. that nagging thought in the midst of a trial. If I had ordered the universe, I would have done a better job of it. I would have gotten this thing right. I would have made sure that this event had not happened. Do you understand what you're doing when you're thinking like that? Maybe it's just a thought. And God is coming to Job and he's challenging him. There are two things happening at the same time here. God is great, but man is, well, small. Job, you're so small. Yes, don't misunderstand what's going on here. God isn't saying that the trial itself is small. God isn't saying that the trial is trivial. He's not saying that. But in the grand scheme of things, Job is small. He's made from the dust of the ground. In the vast cosmos, what is Job? He's just a small thing. He's just a creature that God has made in his image, a creature that God will send his Son to die for and redeem, a creature that God will bring into a family in which Jesus is the elder brother, and he will reckon that person to be a child of God and an heir of God and a joint heir with Jesus Christ. But he's still a creature. He's still a creature. That's what we are. And what did Job say in response? Chapter 40 and verse 4. Job answered the Lord and said, verse 4, "Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further." Do you see what has happened here? And I need to put this delicately. God has shut his mouth. Too many words, and the wrong words, have come out of Job's mouth. And God has shut his mouth. Actually, I think Paul is citing this passage in Romans 3, that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world become guilty before God. I think he's citing this passage. God has shut his mouth. It's time to listen now. It's not time to accuse. It's not time to feel sorry for oneself. It's time to listen and to be subject and to fall before the sovereignty and the majesty of God. That's what has happened. God has humbled him. The argument of innocence is still there. Nothing has changed. The reason for suffering has not been Job's sin in the first place, but in the course of the suffering, there has been sin. In the course of the suffering, Job has said too much. And it's time to fall down before God and to be silent. That God may be all in all. There's more. Job is only beginning to learn this lesson. And in our next lesson, we'll see how God teaches him this lesson a little more.